Hi and welcome back to the channel. On today's episode, I'm going to show you how to configure Ubuntu server on Proxmox. Now you can do this in many ways. You can make it just an LXC container, or you can make it a full-blown virtual machine, which is what this guide is going through. Now in this guide, I'm going to show you the steps that I go through every time I build a Ubuntu server, some of the simple configuration steps I take before then utilizing that for some other solution, whether it be a Jellyfin server, a TrueNAS server, all those kind of things. Now there are different ways of doing this. These are just the guides that I follow religiously every time I build one. Hi, so in this video we're going to discuss how to configure Ubuntu server via Proxmox and set that up as a virtual machine. Now you can containerize it, but for this example I'm going to set it up as a dedicated VM. Now I've already downloaded the most recent version of Ubuntu, so I'm pretty much good to go. If you need to do that though, just visit Ubuntu's website and grab the ISO. I will put the links in the description. So what we're going to do is create a VM. And I will just call this quite straightforward Ubuntu server. And we don't really need to do start on boot yet, but I will enable that later. Now what I'm going to do is select the correct ISO image, which is that one, and that's the very latest fully supported version. So again, we can pretty much click through here. We don't need to do too much. We will turn on that agent later, but I'm not going to do it just yet. Disk wise, we can kind of configure how much space we need. At the moment, 32 gig will be perfectly fine for what I'm going to do with this. So I'll just click next, and I'm going to give it 4 cores. Memory wise, I will probably assign 16 gig to this at the moment. And we could have it ballooned, but we'll need to install guest-agent for that. So at the moment, we'll keep that ticked, but we won't necessarily configure it as yet. And I'm going to run this on my 10 gigabit, which is that bridge. However, you might just select the other. If you want to obviously give it any additional information here, then you can do. We'll just click next and then confirm, and that will basically build out the virtual machine ready to go. So when we go in here, you'll notice that it's already labeled up, gives us the information. You'll see that there's no guest agent configured. We'll do that in a short while as part of the build and installation process. Now the good thing about using Proxmox is it does have an inbuilt console, so it makes the initial configuration really simple, or else you'd have to go through SSH, which isn't configured at this point, which makes it a little bit challenging. So I always find the easiest way to do it is almost go into the console and just click start now, and that will boot up ready to go. And you'll see straight off it wants to try or install Ubuntu, so we'll just click on that. And once it's completed the initialization, it will boot into a almost partial GUI. Okay, so at this point, it comes up with a nice different language options. Now I'm based in the UK, so I will select that. And you'll notice with mine, it's saying that the installer is out of date. Now, I could continue without updating. However, it's always best to use the latest installer. It doesn't usually take very long for that to pull down. So again, depending on your internet connection, but from my point, it was almost instantaneous. So we've got the options there of keyboard layouts, and again, just collect the ones that are relevant to you. And then you've got the options. So you've got whatever decision you want to make here. You've got the standard Ubuntu server, the minimized ones. So that one's more for if you were doing almost like a containerized version. However, for mine, I will be logging in occasionally. So we'll use that. And it's picked up a DHCP address. Now what I can do is, depending on how I want to do this, I could configure it manually, or I could leave it as DHCP and then set that static. Now there are other ways to find these out as well. So I'll just click done don't need a proxy address. I can quite happily set the defaults there. I do want to use the entire 32 gig that I selected. So I'll just go down to done. It gives me an overview of what it's going to do. Click done again and then continue. At this point, it's going to want some credentials. So I'm going to basically partially mirror what I done earlier. We'll use Andy as the thing. Select a good password because this will be your root password. Sudo account. Click done. Do I want to install Open SSH server? Well, for this I will, because I will set up SSH and log in that way. So I certainly do. Don't need to import an identity yet. I'll just click done. And then you've got an option. So if you want to include any of these, and there is a description about what each one of those does, most common ones would probably be Docker. If you're using something as a MQTT broker, you might want to use Mosquito, and Nextcloud are other, fairly common good ones. There's a few others in there as well, like Prometheus, etc. So you've got those options. Now, what I would suggest is don't always necessarily do those, because it might not pull the most recent one at that given time. So if you're going to install one of these, it's sometimes worth just ignoring this, doing all your package updates, and then going and following the correct installation guides for the likes of Docker, etc. So I'm just going to click done. And now it's going to go away and install, and this will take some time.
2,000 years later.
Okay, so that installation is now complete, and we have the option to reboot now. Now I will do everything in the shell at this point. I'm not going to change anything else. You will see, if you do this with Proxmox, you will get the failed unmounting CD-ROM. Now the reason for that is quite simple, because it's basically virtualized. So what we'll do is we'll remove that. It's always good practice to do this. What I will also do at this point as well is set up the option for the qemu-guest-agent, just so that it's ready. And then if we go back to console, hit enter, it will reboot. Now it won't necessarily pick up that guest agent yet, because we need to do some installation. Also, there's some other bits that we'll need to do as well. So it'll go through the original initiation. You will, if you've selected your SSH, be given your SSH key. Mine will be blurred out when it comes up. But yeah, we'll go through that process. So my SSH key is up there, but as I said, I would have blurred that. So okay, first thing to do is log in using those credentials that you set up. It will be case sensitive as well, and I always start with the most simple thing is to do updates to your packages. So start with that. It will require password first time. That will run, and that's basically pulling down the most latest updates. What we can then do, if you use the up key on your keyboard, it will pull up the latest command put in, and then you can just change that to upgrade. And again, it will then prompt you to say what upgrades are required. Just click yes, and that will go through. Now, depending on what release you've got, how recent your download is, what's changed since the latest release, that kind of thing, will really depend on how much this needs to pull down and install. So again, this may take a little bit of time. If you think of it the way you do it in Windows, it's the equivalent of Windows Update, just without the faff. So once complete, it will give you these options to restart the services. You can just go with the standard ones. So yeah, whatever is selected, just go with. There's not really any challenges there. Okay, the next part will be to install the guest agent, and that command will be as follows. So sudo apt-get install qemu-guest-agent, and you will see it does need to download that. Click yes, that will pull down, and again it will give you the option to restart services. We shouldn't need to at this point, so we won't do that. Okay, now at this point it's a very good idea to actually shut down the device rather than rebooting. Now, the reason for that is that the guest agent sometimes doesn't like just being rebooted. So what we can do it a couple of ways. Probably the easiest way is to use the shutdown command up here. So it is usually just stop will do the job for you. But let's click shutdown and it will half gracefully shut that down. So you can see it's not running, it's now turned off there. Now, if I go into summary, currently you see the guest agent isn't running. If I start that now and just leave it in the background running up, so you can see it's spinning up. I'm not going to necessarily flick it onto the console at the moment because hopefully it's going to do exactly what I expect it to do. And you can see the resources polling up and down as it's going through that boot cycle. And there we go. That's the easiest way to tell that the guest agent is running, that I can see the IP address there. So I know my IP address is now 32.113. Now, the reason I've done it that way is because I'm going to now use an SSH program. You could use something like Putty. You can actually do it directly from the console if you want, or any other kind of console tools you've got. I tend to use Terraterm just because I'm familiar with it. So I'm going to move that onto the window so you can see it. I will pre-key in that IP address. So move the Terraterm over here and then go file new connection. You can see I've already pre-populated the IP. You will get asked for SSH cert the first time you do this. I just moved it off the window deliberately. And then we'll log in with what our root password is. So on my occasion, it is as follows. Hopefully, yes, we've logged in. Now, the good thing is using something like Terraterm, it actually makes the copy and pasting really easy. So all these commands I've got on a separate OneNote, so I can just grab them and drop them in. Now, a couple of things I like to do is, one, if you think about the updates and upgrades that we've done earlier, is to have some kind of automation around that. And you could argue that this can go two ways, that sometimes an update might break something, but then do you want risks of security? So various other challenges there. So what I would suggest is making sure that you've got unattended upgrades installed. Now, I think it's already installed by default in this latest version that I've deployed. However, if you need to, that is a command there. And it will prompt for a root password. And as you can see, yeah, that was already installed, so I didn't need to change anything there. So what we're going to do now is just basically go back through the configuration point. So what I'll do is click copy, paste this in, and that will allow us to reconfigure that package. And you'll be prompted with the following. So it says here, by default, up to use a master tool, so you choose that this system automatically download and install updates. Now I'm quite happy with it to do that, so I'm just going to select yes. You could select no, it's up to you. However, I'm happy with it doing that. Now, for me to check what settings it's got is just to paste in this, and it's just using a nano command. So all we're doing is editing that particular conf file. So if we go in there, you can see both of these are set, and that's basically, one is the recurrence, so that just means every 24 hours. So I'm quite happy with it doing that. That's quite good from my perspective. So all I'll do is exit out, so just Control X, and I'm back where I want to go now. So one of the next things I would probably do is lock this down from a firewall point of view. So again, this probably depends on your use case. So if you're not making this publicly available, or presenting this to the World Wide Web, for example, then realistically it's up to you how strict you want to put this firewall on. However, just for this one, because I may make this available outside, I am going to configure this to be quite brutal to begin with. So it uses something called UFW within Ubuntu. So to find the current status, it is the following command. Let's just remove that thing because that's just pulled that out of there. So it's sudo UFW status, and it's currently telling us it's inactive, which I'm expecting it to do. So what I'm going to do is just put in some simple commands. I'm going to allow all outgoing traffic for now. Again, you can lock this down. So at the moment, I'm quite happy for everything to go out. So that's there. What I will then do is deny all incoming. Quite brave, but don't worry. I'll explain what I'm doing next. So that is the next rule. And then the final rule will be to make sure we allow SSH, because if I don't allow SSH, what's going to happen is this session is going to terminate as soon as I enable it. So this only works if you're using the default SSH port. If you change the default SSH port, you will need to change the port allow status. And if you need full guides on UFW, there's plenty available on the World Wide Web. So I'll just apply that. And then the final thing will be to enable it, which is where it gets brave and hopefully I don't get disconnected. So let's just run that. Fingers crossed. And it will warn you. And there we are. So if I now go back to status, I can see that it's enabled. And the good news is I haven't cut myself off, so I've still got SSH access. Now, if you did accidentally cut yourself off, you can still go via the console up here. So it's not a massive problem. The final thing I usually do is just to check the time zone. The reason I do this is because, to be honest, when you go through that initial setup, it is kind of basic. It doesn't really necessarily always pull through the correct information. I'm classed as in the UK, so mine would be London. However, I'm sure it'll probably set it to something like UTC 0, which is fine. It's probably more likely correct. The problem will be is when we get into the GMT and British summertime that this will go out of sync. So I can run the following, which as present, that is the correct time here. So that's fine. However, what I want to do is set mine to London. Now, there's a couple of ways I could do this. I could run the following command there and just make that a non-capital. And that would list all the time zones. Now, I'm not going to run that because the thing is, it will take up a lot of space. I know mine is Europe, London. However, what I'm going to do is show you the easiest way to get it. So if you think of it this way, always go with your capital. So if, for example, you live in UK, it would be London. If you live in France, it would be Paris, etc. In America, well, then you all know the capital there. So all I'm going to do is run that command. So basically, it's listing the time zones and pulling out the London. And there we go. You can see my time zone is Europe, London, which is what I expected it to be. So for me to set that now, all I need to do is run the following, which is basically to set that time control date to Europe, London. And there we go. Now, to prove that's worked, just run the time date CTL again. And there we can see now it's going local time and it's picked up its GMT, which is what's important. And you can see the time zone is now Europe, London. So what will happen now is when my time zone changes, like we get in the UK where we get British summertime, etc., this server will adapt to that because it's looking at the NTP service for Europe, London. Now, if you're running your own NTP, you can also adjust that. However, for this, we're not going to do it. Now, at this point, you're at a really good state to having a Ubuntu server set up and ready to go. Now, the good thing is within Proxmox, if you need to change anything, like i.e. add additional memory, change the hard drive size, etc., you've got the ability to do that here. You can also see the summary and the utilization. Now, I'm going to use this for a Jellyfin installation. So at this point, that's kind of why I've left it like that. It might make it interesting with the firewall rules. My plan is not necessarily to run Jellyfin permanently this way. I might put it on a Docker installation on my Synology NAS. But for demonstration purposes, I'm certainly going to do it this way. So there we are. We're good to go. Hi and welcome back. Hopefully you've found that video informative. You've been able to configure Ubuntu server, deploy that within Proxmox, configure the firewall to a certain degree, set the time zone, enable automatic updates, and most importantly, installing the qemu-guest-agent to enable advanced features within Proxmox. Now, my next steps for these videos will involve looking at other Homelab solutions, so the likes of Jellyfin, TrueNAS, etc. If you have liked this channel so far and the direction that I'm going in, please hit the subscribe and or the like button, or even drop me a comment. You know, I'm really keen to get some feedback, and on the next set we'll cover off some more advanced features of using the likes of Proxmox and Ubuntu server for more in-depth configuration setups.